The first thing Lieutenant Mason Rourke understood was that the mountain had already decided where his men were allowed to die. Hard daylight blazed across the snowfields so fiercely it made the world look clean, almost innocent. It was the kind of white that should have belonged to postcards and silence. Instead, it flashed with muzzle bursts. The ridgeline above them spat fire from 3 directions. Bullets cracked over shattered rock and slapped into ice with the sharp, flat sound of hands striking wet stone. Fragments bit the air. Snow dust kicked up around their cover in little white puffs that looked harmless until they turned pink near the point man's leg. They were trapped in a bowl of stone and crusted snow barely 30 yards across. Behind them, the mountain rose into a cliff face too steep to climb under load. Ahead, the terrain fell away into an exposed white apron that would turn any man who crossed it into a black target on clean paper. To their left, a machine gun on the ridge stitched long bursts into the lip of their cover, forcing heads down. To their right, riflemen and at least one marksman worked angles through broken stone. At the one obvious gap in the rocks, a narrow cut that looked like escape if you only glanced once, an RPG team waited, calm as hunters over a game trail. 39. Chief Nolan Vance muttered after another scan between bursts. I count 39. Nobody answered him. Nobody argued either. That was the worst part. The numbers sounded insane, but the geometry made it believable. Men moved in disciplined slivers along the crescent of high ground above them. There were too many muzzle flashes, too many controlled transitions, too many shadows passing rifles and ammunition. This wasn't a wild militia swarming downhill. It was a planned ring of fire. Petty Officer Cruz, their point man, lay on his side behind a split boulder, breathing in ragged pulls that made steam in the cold. Blood had soaked through the white overlayer on his thigh and turned the snow beneath him to rust-colored ice. Doc Henley knelt beside him, trying to jam packing into the wound with one hand while firing short, economical bursts with the other whenever movement showed itself on the right ridge. Every time Henley looked down at Cruz, rounds snapped overhead hard enough to remind him what happened to men who stared too long in one place. Falcon, this is Reaper 2, troops in contact, immediate. Static swallowed the radio operator's voice. Petty Officer Briggs slapped the side of his handset and tried again, hunching low as another burst chewed stone above his shoulder. Falcon, break, grid. Nothing. Only chopped noise and a faint ghost of his own transmission bouncing back in broken fragments. Jammed, terrain masked, or both. It did not matter. The effect was the same. Their world had shrunk to rock, snow, blood, and sectors. Rourke checked magazines without really seeing them anymore. He saw math instead. Remaining rounds. Heat in barrels. Exposure lines. Time until someone tried to rush. Time until Cruz bled through compression. Time until one of the enemy RPG teams stopped waiting and started collapsing the pocket a little at a time. He felt the mission peel away from him like loose skin. Recovering the sensor package no longer mattered. The relay site did not matter. Extraction as a clean plan did not matter. The only objective left was obscene in its simplicity. Make the next minute happen, then the one after that. Stop saying help, he told his men. His voice was low, almost flat. No rescue talk. Sectors only. Angles. Ammunition. We hold corners. It landed because it was true. Nobody looked at him, but shoulders settled. Professionals did not always need hope. Sometimes they needed a shape for their fear. The enemy kept working the bowl. Not rushing. Not wasting themselves. That chilled them more than charge would have. They were tightening. Probing the seam on the left. Watching the cut in the rocks. Holding the snow apron in front. Rourke saw a man on the far shelf rise higher than the others, long gun braced, patient and still, their sniper, waiting for panic movement. Then the man's head snapped sideways, and he vanished. Rourke blinked. The shot had come from somewhere else. Not from inside the bowl. Not from any rifle around him. It was a single precise crack from high and far enough off angle that the sound reached them oddly, clipped by stone. For 1 second, the whole ridgeline seemed to hesitate. Then an enemy runner crouched behind a low rock wall on the upper slope, reaching for a radio handset. Another shot cracked. The runner folded without finishing the motion. Confusion rippled across the fighters above. Men turned the wrong way. A hand signal died half-formed. Fire slackened on the left for exactly 3 heartbeats. Vance lifted his head, just enough to scan. Who the hell is that? No call sign came through the radio. No friendly voice broke the static. No signal flare. Nothing except the effect, clean, impossible, surgical. The kind of shooting that did not hit the closest threat, but the one that mattered most. A burst of gunfire hammered from the right ridge, as if the enemy wanted to deny what had just happened. Then one of the riflemen there rose to shift position, and a third shot dropped it before he could settle. A pattern was emerging inside the chaos. Each time the ring above them tried to cinch tighter, one shot cut a vital wire. Each time the enemy moved to coordinate, to flank, to steady the trap, that movement ended in snow. The men in the bowl were still pinned, still low on ammunition, still 1 bad minute from being overrun. But now death no longer felt like a wall coming straight at them. It felt interrupted, delayed by a mind they could not see. Briggs lowered his useless radio and looked up into the blinding white slopes as if he could will a face to appear there. Rourke did the same. Somewhere out in the stone and glare, outside the trap and above the killing lanes, someone was fighting a separate battle on their behalf. Not a machine gunner, not a support bird, not luck. One rifle, one patient intelligence, one hidden hand reaching into the geometry of the ambush and breaking it at the joints. And though none of them could see her yet, somehow they all knew the same thing at once. The ghost in the mountain was a woman. Hours earlier, the mountain had seemed merely cold. Morning came hard and blue over the border sector, turning every ridge into a blade of light. The joint element moved in a deliberate line across packed snow and broken shale, small against the enormity around them. They had inserted at first light, carrying a simple mission wrapped in the usual layers of contingency. Inspect a remote sensor and relay site after signs of tampering, recover any stored surveillance data that had not yet been exfiltrated upstream, confirm whether the site had been compromised, and get out before the afternoon weather shift tightened the air corridor and turned the high routes unpredictable. It was the kind of assignment that sounded administrative until it wasn't. Rourke led the element with the habitual economy of a man who saved words for when they bought something. Vance, broader and older, moved just off his shoulder, steady as old iron. Doc Henley carried the odd, split attention of all combat medics, eyes always counting both threats and bodies. Briggs handled comms, batteries protected inside his chest layers against the cold. 2 more shooters rounded out the core package. Attached at the last moment from an Overwatch cell was a sniper named Mara Vale. She had a reputation, which in that world usually meant one of 2 things. She was loud and good, or quiet and better than most people knew. Vale belonged to the second type. She kept her rifle wrapped for cold and glare, her range notes folded flat under her front layer, and her face almost expressionless unless someone asked her a question worth answering. White over smock, minimal movement, breathing controlled not only for the shot, but to keep the optic from frosting. Even standing still, she looked like someone who had already chosen where not to waste energy. The others respected her in the way professionals respect proven skill. But it was the shallow respect of inclusion on paper, not an instinct. During route talk and timing checks, the center of the plan still formed around the direct action men. Their movement lane, their search flow, their withdrawal. Vale was included but orbiting, useful if needed, supporting. Nobody said it openly. Nobody had to. The assumption hung in the air that the main action, if any came, would be decided where most rifles were. Men like Rourke and Vance had earned that bias through years of work. But bias did not need malice to become costly. At the final pause before the site, they knelt in broken shadow below a shoulder of rock while Rourke reviewed timing. 10 minutes in, 6 to confirm package out on my mark. We missed the weather gate. We climb into a problem. Vale was glassing a ridge line, half a click off. There's already a problem. Vance glanced over. You got movement, not movement. She lowered the optic. Boot cuts. Old but not that old. Under fresh powder in the north drift. Someone used that traverse before the snow reset. Briggs squinted uphill as if eyes alone might pull the sign out of the brightness. Could be shepherd traffic. There are no shepherd trails at this elevation, she said. Nobody snapped back. They listened. Vale almost never volunteered. She shifted her gaze toward the relay site, a small hard-edged interruption in the white landscape where a mast and equipment box sat among black rocks. That panel was open clean. Hinges aren't bent. Fasteners weren't forced. Whoever touched it wanted it to look damaged, not destroyed. Henley frowned. You're calling bait? I'm saying somebody wanted a response team to come check their work. Rourke took that in. He did not dismiss it. He also looked at the light over the peaks, the thin veil of weather miles off, and the clock that pressed on every decision in mountain country. Maybe, he said, we still need the package. Vale nodded once. No argument. But when it moved again, she drifted subtly wider from the main body than the original sketch had called for. Not far enough to break support. Far enough to be off the obvious axis. Rourke noticed. You're walking the ugly side? Better sight lines if this goes bad. Vance almost smiled. Always cheerful. Vale studied the slope ahead, not him. There's an ice cleft under that western lip. Looks useless. Might not be. Rourke followed her line and saw little more than broken blue ice jammed in stone. Reachable. Maybe not for most people. That was all she gave him. But as they continued, he filed it away. The relay site came into view in full. Low equipment housing half buried by drift, mass carrying scarred weather instruments, and an electronics case with one access panel hanging at a careful angle. Too careful, Vale had implied. Nearby, the snow held partial signs of disturbance, enough to suggest haste, not enough to tell a simple story. Briggs crouched at the housing and began checks. Power intermittent. Data buffer shows manual interruption. Vance found the first missing item. Storage drive, slots empty. Henley pointed at another casing tucked under a shelf in the box. And here's a decoy left just visible enough to make us dig. Rourke's face tightened. It was beginning to smell wrong in a way that had nothing to do with weather or machinery. Not random sabotage. Not vandalism. The site had been touched by hands that understood how response teams thought. Leave enough damage to force inspection. Remove something meaningful. Leave something visible to slow the search. Build friction into the clock. Waiting for what? For the team, Bill had already guessed. Maybe for the data package. Maybe for a body. Maybe for both. The motive was still a shadow, but its outline was there. Whoever had built this wanted more than wreckage. They wanted something intact. Surveillance data. Prisoners. Proof. The kind of footage and capture material that could be cut into propaganda or mined for patterns. Rourke started to open his mouth, maybe to order a faster strip and immediate displacement, but the mountain answered first. The first shot cracked from the heights and hit stone just behind Vance's shoulder. Then 3 more came in a tight chain, front and rear, as if invisible fingers had pinned the team at both ends before anyone could choose a direction. Contact! Vance roared. The machine gun on the left ridge opened with savage confidence, stitching the approach and driving the team exactly where the terrain wanted them, down into the natural depression below the site. Rourke dropped behind rock and saw, in a single terrible glance, that Vale was no longer with them. Not lost. Not dead. Outside the bowl. The easiest operator to overlook had become the only one not trapped inside the trap. The ambush was not chaotic. That was what made it terrifying. Chaos would have offered mistakes, overextension, bad angles, men rising too high or charging too fast. What came instead was structure. Precision fire hit the front and rear to freeze the team's instinct to bound out. The machine gun on the left ridge came alive not to kill immediately, but to herd, sweeping lines that punished any move toward open ground and pushed the seals into the depression beside the site. Only after the bowl had closed did the second element reveal itself on the right ridge. Riflemen and 1 marksman using staggered positions to create crossing lanes through the broken stone. It was a geometry problem with blood for ink. Rourke popped smoke toward the left seam and tried the textbook answer anyway. 2-man bound. Move on smoke. The wind stole the screen almost at once. thinning it into a transparent gray wash that only sharpened the muzzle flashes behind it. Enemy rounds cut the escape line before Vance, and another shooter had taken 2 steps. They went back down hard behind cover, stone chips biting exposed skin. They had it dialed. Vance spat. Briggs was already on comms, pushing transmission after transmission into static. The answer that came back was always the same: chopped noise, blank hiss, or the warped echo of his own voice. Then he looked past the relay mast, and his face changed. There, tucked lower on the slope near a rock wall, was a shape too square and deliberate to be natural. Compact antenna, cables, shielded body, a portable jammer in a camouflage position. They brought electronics, Briggs said. This whole thing was built. An RPG slammed into the rock lip above them before anyone answered. The blast flung snow, stone, and metal shards into the pocket. One fragment punched in the shoulder of the youngest shooter in the stack, Tyler Keene, and spun him backward with a stunned cry. Henley was on him at once, dragging him tighter behind cover while still trying to keep his own rifle in the fight. One rifle went quiet while he packed the wound. The silence of that one gun felt enormous. "Emo," Vance called after another exchange. Nobody replied, because everyone was already counting. They were down to disciplined bursts and single shots of flashes, exposed heads, movement crossing rock gaps. The enemy had numbers enough to rotate shooters. The team in the bowl did not. Every magazine spent here reduced future options in visible increments. Rourke flattened against stone and watched the ridgeline like a man trying to solve an equation that wanted him dead. They weren't rushing. That was the key. If the enemy had only wanted kills, they could have tried to flood the bowl early and paid for it in bodies. Instead, they were tightening, probing, holding lanes, letting blood loss and ammunition shortage do work on their behalf, letting fear create bad decisions. Prisoners, he realized. They wanted prisoners as much as data. He scanned again and started to pick out structure from the apparent sprawl. A central commander on the upper middle shelf, moving between cover and signaling with crisp arm motions. A radio runner crouched lower, passing direction. 2 RPG pairs alternating readiness. A machine gun team on the left ridge. The marksman on the right. Others holding flank positions and dead ground. This wasn't a mob. It was a hunt team. A voice in accented English floated down once between bursts. "Drop your weapons." Nobody answered. They attempted a local counterpunch toward what looked like thinner resistance on the right. Vance and another shooter rose in sequence, laid suppressive fire, and shifted. For one heartbeat, it looked possible. Then 5 more fighters rose from behind, wind-carved rocks farther out than expected, and drove them back with disciplined volleys. Hidden flank. Predicted move. The mountain seemed to close another finger around them. Briggs ducked lower to shield his equipment, but a round struck the spare battery clipped inside his side pouch. The impact cracked the casing with a dead, final sound. He pulled it out, saw the damage, and dropped it into the snow like something rotten. "That was the backup," he said. Overhead, a small drone buzzed into view, fast and insectal. It did not fire. It did not need to. It hovered just long enough to map their exact positions and then darted away behind the ridge. "Now they've got live eyes," Henley muttered, hands red from Keene's blood inside his gloves. The sun shifted higher. Snow glare became its own enemy. The bright world around them amplified every dark shape, every movement, every exposed edge of gear. Shadows changed under rocks. Optics flashed in the distance. The cold burned uncovered skin until faces felt split and raw. Rourke counted odds again and felt the answer harden into something grim and clear. Unless something outside the bowl changed, extraction was no longer a plan. It was a fading possibility men sometimes spoke about before the truth arrived. Outside the trap, crawling through broken white and black stone on her wider line, Mara Vale finally saw the whole picture. She had heard the opening shots and already known what the others were living before she had visual confirmation. But confirmation mattered. She dropped behind a rib of rock and glassed the ridges with disciplined patience while rounds stitched the depression below. In seconds, the pattern resolved. Jammer near the relay line. Commander center high. Machine gun left. Marksman right. RPGs covering the obvious gap. A drone team farther back. And off to one side, beneath an overhung lip of wind-packed snow and stone, the ice cleft she had noticed earlier. From below, it looked like nothing. From her angle, it looked like a door. It led to a lateral shelf cut into the mountain, a blind route masked from the bowl and partially hidden from the upper crescent. Narrow, awkward, possibly suicidal underload. Also the only path to an angle the enemy had not fully secured. She watched another RPG impact shower fragments into the SEAL's pocket. She saw the machine gun lift and stitch the left seam again. She saw the commander's signal and the subtle repositioning that followed. Smart enemy, patient enemy, intentional enemy. Nobody could authorize what she was about to do. There was no time to ask, no comms to carry the request, even if she wanted to. And if she stayed where she was and traded at long range from a conventional angle, she would maybe kill one rifleman before the whole ridge collapsed on her position. To save the team, she had to become a different problem. Below, protocol was losing to terrain, numbers, and blood loss. Above, Vale made her choice and moved toward the cleft. For several minutes, the loudest thing in her world was her own breathing. That was the strange divide of mountain combat. Men could be dying within sight. The air below could be alive with gunfire and fragments. And yet one ridge over there could still be pockets of perfect stillness where a single scrape mattered more than an explosion. Vale moved away from the sound of the fight before she moved back toward it, circling wider along stone ribs and broken crust so she could approach the shelf on the enemy's blind side. The cleft was uglier up close. Blue ice jammed between rock walls at an angle too steep for comfort, too narrow for easy movement. She slung the rifle tight and used both hands. Cramp and teeth bit shallow, controlled placements into ice that wanted noise. Every careful step became an argument against gravity. One slip here would not make for drama. It would make for disappearance. Gunfire rolled below, muffled and distorted by the terrain. The battle sounded far away and immediate at the same time, like thunder trapped under stone. A fragment of signal hissed in her earpiece once. Some broken attempt from Briggs, or maybe interference rebounding oddly through the rock. She ignored it, reaching for the transmitter, adjusting posture, exposing even a fraction of profile at the wrong moment could cost her the shelf. Silence was not absence now. It was concealment. A weapon. Halfway up, she stopped under a narrow shadow and checked her optic. Frost had begun to creep along the edge of the lens from breath and cold. She wiped it carefully with a gloved thumb and a strip of cloth, slow enough not to smear it, fast enough not to waste life below. Another burst of firing cracked through the mountain, followed by the distinct concussion of an RPG. She did not look down. This was the part most people misunderstood about composure. It was not the absence of fear. Fear was present in her hands, her calves, the small muscles along her jaw. Fear of falling. Fear of being seen halfway. Fear of arriving 2 minutes too late and finding a solved battlefield below. Function did not erase fear. It simply outranked it. She paused once more near the upper lip and built the target ladder in her mind. Enemy sniper, first if exposed. Radio control. RPG teams. Machine gun. Commander. Then any node trying to rebuild initiative. Not nearest. Not loudest. Most dangerous to friendly movement. That order had a history. Years earlier, on another mountain in another country, she had watched a team die by inches because the first return fire had chased what was visible instead of what mattered. Men had spent rounds on shouting riflemen while a radio link stayed alive, an RPG pair kept position, and a coordinator stitched a battlefield back together around them. By the time someone killed the right targets, the wrong damage had already been done. She never forgot the lesson. Battlefields were systems, not storms. She eased higher, body tight to stone, and finally reached the lateral shelf. It was almost absurd how invisible it had been from below. The ledge ran under an overhanging lip of rock and wind-packed snow, narrow as a grave border in places, opening wider only at one broken notch where a prone firing position was just barely possible. From there, she could see into the enemy's back line with a clarity that made the whole ambush feel suddenly fragile. The radio runner crouched behind a low wall. Ammunition was stacked in 2 shallow caches. The commander shifted between 3 cover points in a disciplined pattern. The jammer sat half-hidden behind stone, cabled to a compact power source. She even saw the drone team tucked farther back. The ledge gave her information and almost nothing else. There was no room to truly reposition. Little overhead cover. Recoil management mattered because a bad shoulder set could slide her inches closer to open air. She tested her body angle twice until the rifle settled exactly where it needed to. Below, in the bowl, she saw one of the SEALs gesture that he was nearly dry. Rourke shifted closer to him and looked toward the left seam with the expression of a man preparing a breakout he did not believe in. That was her clock. If she shot too early, the enemy would scatter, identify the threat, and send hunters before the team could move. Too late, and the men below would be forced into the snow apron or die where they lay. She checked wind by a whisper of drift off the rock. Measured distance bands. Watched the rhythm of the right ridge marksman. Waited until the commander signaled movement and the radio runner turned his head. Patterns overlapped. A sequence emerged. Vale let one breath out, held the last of it, tightened her finger. The first shot broke the enemy sniper before the man understood he had entered someone else's sight line. He jerked and vanished from the far shelf, rifle skidding against stone. Vale was already cycling the bolt, the motion clean and economical before the echo fully rolled away. She shifted 2 body widths through the optic and found the radio controller rising behind his low wall. Handset lifting in confusion. Second shot. He folded across the rock as if sleep had struck him mid-task. Below, the change was instant though small. Fire lost rhythm on the right. The machine gun on the left held too long between bursts. Men looked in the wrong directions. It was not enough to save anyone by itself. It was enough to create uncertainty. That was all professionals needed. Vale found the nearer RPG gunner in the cut between 2 boulders, launcher coming up toward the bowl. His body language said confidence. He believed the trapped men had nowhere left to go. Third shot. The launcher dropped with him. The assistant gunner lunged to recover the tube. Fourth shot. He collapsed over it, denying immediate reuse. Down in the pocket, Vance lifted his head. "That's deliberate," he shouted. "She's killing the right ones." Rourke did not answer, but he saw it too. Whoever was out, there was not sniping for body count. The most dangerous roles were disappearing in sequence. He acted on the opening at once. Shift left 2 meters. Feed Keener mags. Henley, keep 'em moving if we go. Men moved low, dragging weapons and ammunition through icy slush as enemy fire searched for coherence. Vale continued the ladder. The machine gun team on the left ridge had been the trap's hinge, the line that turned movement into slaughter. She watched the gunner settle for another stitching burst and sent a round through the pause between inhale and trigger press. The weapon dipped. The spotter beside him reached to correct, exposing himself just enough. Another shot. The left ridge sputtered into disorganized individual fire. Now the commander understood. Vale saw it in the man's posture even before he started signaling. This was no random return fire. Someone above and outside the bowl was dismantling his structure. He reacted exactly the way a competent leader should. Fighters split wider. Silhouettes dropped lower. 2 men peeled off toward the back slope where the ledge system might be reached from below. The drone team launched again. Search and fix. Counterhunt. Vale's position had lasted as long as surprise could keep it hidden. From here on, every shot had to serve 2 masters: battlefield effect and survival. She caught movement near the jammer. The team manning it was shifting the unit to a backup depression, maybe anticipating direct fire. That node mattered as much as any rifle now. Without comms, the men below could not synchronize a withdrawal with whatever support might still exist beyond the valley. She adjusted slightly, felt rock cut through the knee of her outer layer, and sent 1 round into the compact power source. Sparks jumped. The housing jumped sideways. Before the operator could yank the unit behind cover, she put the next round through him. In the bowl, Briggs's headset erupted with ragged noise. Then, through the static, a fragment of actual signal. Copy, repeat. His face changed like a man hearing oxygen in an airless room. He jammed the handset close and shoved a broken contact report through the reopened crack in the electronic wall. It was not clean. It was not strong. It was enough. The enemy adapted again. Farther back on a shelf, Vale had only partly noticed a two-man mortar pair hauled a short tube into place. Improvised, light, but deadly enough if they could walk rounds onto the trap team's pocket or collapse her ledge. She reprioritized without thought. Mortar lead bent over the tube, aligning. She killed him before the base plate settled. The assistant grabbed the plate and dragged, trying to save the system. One more shot clipped him down behind the rock. Below, men were beginning to shoot at shadows. Fighters on the right ridge sprayed bursts into empty snow pockets and black cracks in the rock, trying to kill the rifle they could not locate. Panic fire is not the same as pressure. It is loud, and it exposes. Vale took advantage where she could, but the true danger was no longer the broad ridgeline. It was the two climbers moving toward her shelf. She caught the first one just as he rose over the lower lip, chest forward, weapon coming up too high. One round solved him. The second was better. He disappeared under the shelf itself, moving in dead space where her overwatch angle failed. For the first time since the climb, Vale had to split her attention between the large fight and a single nearby man who might appear at arm's length. Down in the bowl, Rourke felt the rhythm of enemy fire fracture in a way that could finally be used. "Package the wounded," he barked. "We move on left seam in pairs. Low smoke, then bound." Henley cinched Keen tighter and shifted Cruz's drag line. Vance redistributed the last full of magazines. Nobody asked where the help was coming from anymore. They understood enough. Not who, not how. Enough. On the ridge above, the enemy commander began moving again, trying to physically rebuild the line. He left cover in a short cross-slope dash. One arm lifted to redirect a flank element and reassert control. Vale saw him the instant he committed. The shot was longer than the climber problem deserved, more exposed than she liked, and absolutely necessary. She pressed. The commander pitched sideways mid-stride and tumbled into the snow. Something invisible snapped across the enemy formation. Not morale exactly. Cohesion. Hand signals stopped. Fighters who had been advancing with intention now hesitated, looking for orders that would never arrive. Flank elements checked up. The machine of the ambush became disconnected men with rifles and fear. "Go!" Rourke shouted. Smoke popped low along the left seam. Thin, fast shredding in the wind, but enough to dirty the sight picture for seconds. Vance and another shooter moved first, low and brutal, sliding more than running. Henley and Briggs dragged Cruz. Keen stumbled on his own legs, half-carried. Rourke anchored the rear, firing only when exposure justified the round. Enemy pressure surged once, desperate, and concentrated on the withdrawal package. But without the sniper, the RPG coverage, the radio control, the commander, and the stable machine gun line, the fire became loud rather than effective. Dangerous, yes. Coordinated, no. Vale spent her last clean sequence on pursuit blockers. A squad leader trying to rally men near the right ridge. A rifleman cutting toward the seam. The final machine gun threat, lifting downhill for a desperation burst. Each shot was a door slammed at the correct moment. Then the second climber came for her. He rose so close beneath the shelf that she saw the frost on his scarf before the rifle in his hands fully appeared. There was no room for drama. No room for a clever move. Vale rolled just enough to keep his muzzle off center line, fired at near distance, and drove the shot through him in one hard, efficient motion. His body hit the ledge edge, stuck for half a heartbeat. Then she shoved with her boot and sent him away into open air. Silence rushed into the space he had occupied. Not real silence. Battle still cracked across the valley, but a local silence, intimate and ferocious. Her rifle was nearly empty. One glove had torn at the palm during the climb. Stone had sliced her cheek somewhere in the repositioning and left a line of frozen blood along her jaw. None of it mattered yet. Below, the team reached a secondary spur. a mean little fold of rock better suited to defense than the bowl. They piled in, dragging wounded, setting sectors alive. Far off, through broken comms, rotor call signs and support chatter began to sound less like fantasy and more like possibility. Vale looked once across the white bowl, where 39 fighters had expected to close over trapped men and claim them intact. They had nearly done it. What broke them was not a miracle, not luck, not volume. It was one rifle in the hands of someone who understood where a battlefield actually lived. By the time intermittent support fully answered, the mountain had gone from immediate violence to a colder kind of reckoning. The surviving team held the secondary spur until extraction could reach them through the damaged corridor. The comms were still ragged, but Briggs's broken report had been enough to redirect assets and keep friendly elements from flying blind into the same trap. That alone justified the shots into the jammer. It was impossible to separate which decision had mattered most, because by then each correct choice leaned on the others. The sniper kill enabled movement. The radio kill delayed coordination. The jammer kill reopened the world. The commander kill broke the spine of the hunt. Cruz survived, though the wound in his leg would become a story his body told every winter. Keene left the mountain with shrapnel buried, where surgeons could not safely dig all of it out. No one came away untouched, not really. Even the men without holes in them carried that peculiar heaviness that followed narrow survival. The knowledge that triumph was the wrong word for what had happened. In debrief, the picture sharpened. The relay site had not been vandalized. It had been staged. Data had been selectively removed to force recovery action and to test how quickly a response team would commit into that terrain. The decoy component had been left visible to slow the search. The jammer had been prepositioned. The killed box had been chosen specifically for its calm shadows, high ground arcs, and confinement. The enemy had wanted more than dead bodies. They had wanted captured surveillance material, captured operators, and a propaganda victory wrapped around both. A test and an ambush at the same time. When the room turned to the question of why the mission had not ended there, Rourke answered in the plain language of a man too tired to perform. Because Vale read it before contact, he said, and because she moved off the standard axis when the rest of us didn't. Nobody argued. Mara Vale sat at the edge of the debrief space with a strip of tape across her cut cheek and her hands wrapped around a cup that had long since gone cold. She did not decorate the story. When asked about target sequence, she listed it simply. Sniper, radio control, RPG, gun team, jammer, mortar, commander, pursuit blockers, systems, not noise. That was how she saw it. Somewhere inside the accounting, the older truth surfaced too, not in a dramatic confession, in fragments, in a way she explained why command nodes mattered more than body count. In the brief silence after someone asked where she had learned to read a fight like that, men in the room understood what was not fully spoken. She had learned it from loss, from a battlefield where the wrong priorities had left the right people dead. Respect changed shape that day. It did not arrive as applause or speeches. It arrived in the way the others reconstructed the mountain around her choices, shot by shot, as if they were finally seeing where she had truly been the whole time. The attached Overwatch specialist, the quiet operator at the edge of planning, the one treated as secondary right up until secondary became the only position that could save them. Vale never claimed she had rescued anybody. She spoke instead about the team holding sectors under impossible pressure, about Briggs staying on comms until the jammer died, about Henley treating men under fire, about Rourke waiting exactly long enough to exploit the opening instead of breaking too soon. It was typical of her and, in a way, infuriating. She kept giving the story back to the group when everyone in the room knew the group was only there to tell it, because one person had carried the decisive weight alone. At the end, when the debrief finally thinned into silence, Rourke looked at her and said what needed saying. It wasn't luck, he said. Wasn't timing. Wasn't a ghost in the snow. It was the one operator we all treated like she was on the edge of the frame until the mountain started deciding who lived. No one laughed. No one looked away. Outside, evening light faded over the white bowl where the trap had been built so carefully. Shell marks cooled in the silence. Blood darkened, then dulled, then disappeared into the broad indifference of snow. From a distance the ridges looked untouched again, almost pure. But along the outer slope, faint and narrow against the whitening ground, a single set of tracks hewed across the mountain where nobody had been watching that morning. That was the path that mattered, not the loud route, not the obvious one, the one taken by the quiet operator nobody centered until everything depended on her. And that was the truth the men carried down from the mountain with their wounded and their dead weight of memory. Belonging was never granted by volume, rank, or who stood closest to the center before the fight began. It was earned in the unseen place, in the cold, in the silence, in the moment one person did the work that let the others go on living.